So there's going to come a time when a student asks you a question that is either outside the scope of the course or something you've just overlooked and you're not going to know the answer to it. I promise you, that time will come. And envision yourself standing there in front of like the whole class. There's like 28 kids, all of their little eyes looking at you. Your hands start to get a bit sweaty and your heart rate rises just a little bit. And it's very nerve-wracking. And if you're unprepared, like you're a new teacher or you're studying to be a teacher, you need a strategy to deal with those situations gracefully and as a way to be a learning opportunity for the students. And that's where I come in. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name's Mark. I'm a high school maths teacher. If you've been here for a while as a subscriber, welcome back to the channel. Now, today we're going to be talking about how to answer questions that you don't know the answer to or how to deal with that situation. And first I want to start with a little story because this is something that I had to deal with and learn about very quickly in my career. So when I was on prac in the high school that I now currently teach at, I was asked by the head of department who really wanted me to teach there and give me a contract after I finished my prac. She asked me if I could teach the highest level of maths because one of the teachers was retiring in the next year. And I said to her, yes, I can. Very confidently. Fake it till you make it, you know? And while I had the math skills, there was bits and pieces of that curriculum that I had not faced either when I was in high school or at university. Now, I was confident that I could learn how to teach those things. I could learn the mathematics behind it, but I didn't already know I could do it. So I kind of like took a leap, said, yeah, sure, I can do it. Please give me a job. And I got the job. And so I'm preparing in the next year, preparing to teach that content. And I was, for 3 straight years, the kids didn't really know. Maybe they knew. I don't know if they knew or not, but for 3 straight years, I was staying one step ahead of the kids. I was studying at home, I was practicing the content, and inevitably, because I was only at a surface level with that content, keep in mind, I am better now. So any of my students out there watching it, I know the content much deeper now. Don't worry, you can't trick me anymore. But at the time, I had a very surface level understanding of the content, and so inevitably, especially with these high achieving students in this high achieving math course, they had heaps of questions that asked deeper questions about the knowledge. That was a very poor sentence structure. They asked questions that were outside the scope of the course, but related to the content, and I didn't know how to answer those questions. And so I developed a strategy, which I still use to this day. I think it's the best way to answer these questions, and I'm going to share it with you today. But I think it's important for you to understand that even though I'm, in my opinion, a great maths teacher, I get questions all the time that I don't know how. I get questions all the time that I don't know how to answer. And so I've developed this strategy. I think you're going to like the strategy, and I highly recommend that you use it because there's nothing worse than dealing with this situation the wrong way, which is what I'm going to start with. Now, first things first, the absolute wrong way to deal with a situation when a student asks you a question and you don't know the answer, the worst thing you can do is either pass off the question as not important. Don't worry about that. You don't need to know that. That's like the worst thing to say to a kid because they've just indicated that they're curious. They've raised their hand and they've said, sir, question, question, question. And you've said, that's not important. Don't ask that kind of question. Even if you don't say that with your words, if you pass off that question as not that important, all they're hearing is your question is not important. And that kid is not going to ask as many questions in the future, which is not what we want. I just said that was the worst thing you could do. I've changed my mind. The worst thing you can do, and please never do this, is lie about the answer. Or try and use your basic knowledge to give them an answer. You don't always have to be giving them an answer. And that's what I'm going to talk about with the right way to answer this kind of question. There's 3 steps to this. The first step is to acknowledge that you don't actually know the answer, right? Kid asks you a question and you go, I actually don't know. But notice how I did that. I didn't just go, I don't know, right? That does not build confidence in the child at all. But if a kid asks you a question and you go, I actually don't know the answer to that. What that's demonstrating to the student is that you're thinking about their question. So you're not passing it off. But you're also going, that's actually a good question. And that's part 2. You're demonstrating that in your mannerisms. But part 2 is to actually verbally acknowledge it as a good question. So you follow that up with, I actually don't know the answer. That's a really good question. And the part that, those 2 steps in and of themselves are super easy to do, but they actually build confidence in the student. Rather, the confidence in you gets built by the student because you're demonstrating a couple of things. You're modeling a couple of things, right? The first thing you're modeling is genuine curiosity. That's all we want students to be. We really just want them to be curious and lifelong learners. And you demonstrating that in front of a class with a bunch of expecting students, right? You're the harbinger of all knowledge. I don't even know if harbinger is the right word, but you're the holder of all knowledge. And then finally they ask you a question you don't know the answer. You have to be curious about that answer. You're going, I actually don't know that, but that's really interesting. I want to figure out more about that. Big shout out to Dens. I don't know if that's how you pronounce this username, but Dens for giving me this question in one of the comments of my recent videos. Really appreciate that. And if you're sitting there watching my videos and you have any questions, whether it's related to the content or not, make sure you leave a comment down below. I really like to read what you guys have to say. I really like to read what kind of questions you've got, and it allows me to create videos that are important to the audience, to you guys, right? So I wouldn't have made this video unless Dens asked this question. So thank you, Dens. And if you've got any questions, or even if you just want to drop down in the comments and say, hello, Mark, how are you going? I would love to hear that too. Always, at this stage, I'm really trying to respond to every single comment. So make sure you leave one. I'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you for doing that. Let's move on. Now, when you verbally acknowledge, that's a great question. That part of the puzzle, that gives students license even to ask more questions, be more curious, and inquire more. That's what we want from them. We want the students, as you're teaching, we want them to be actively engaging with that content. And if you've created an environment in your classroom where questions are kind of frowned upon, and you don't want kids to ask you challenging questions, they are not going to engage with the content. But if you create an environment where every time there's a question asked and you don't know the answer, or even if you do, you go, that's a great question. That's a really good way to think about this. You're thinking deeply about it and you model that over and over and over. It's going to encourage your students to, as you're teaching, actually be thinking and going, what question could I ask Mr. O'Donoghue about this? Or even if they're not thinking about that specifically, they might be going, I wonder if that links to this math concept at all. Right? And this doesn't have to just be math, by the way. It could be history, English, whatever you're teaching. You want to encourage them to ask deeper questions. Now, it might feel like, and I'm going to take a quick pause here to acknowledge this, it might feel like the students are going to look at you. If this is happening regularly, where you don't know the answer to questions, you might think that they're going to think of you as dumb. They might lose respect for you because you don't know all the answers to all the questions. And I promise you, that is not what's going to happen. If you tell students regularly you don't know, as long as you follow it up with the next two steps, which I'll talk about, but if you tell them you don't know, they are not going to think less of you. In fact, they're probably going to look at you as a bit more authentic and relatable and actually like you more. They're going to like you if you tell them, I don't know, because they don't know all the time. And if the teacher can be that relatable, they're going to trust you. They're going to trust that you can teach them because you're going to find out yourself. And that's a great segue into the third part. So first part, acknowledge you don't know. Second part, acknowledge it's a great question. And the third part is how you deal with it, because you can't just leave it at that. You can't just say, I don't know. It's a great question. And then move on. That's so unsatisfying, right? So I'm going to give you two steps. And I use these interchangeably. Depending on the kid, depending on my mood, I will give two different answers, right? So the first thing, my recommendation is after you've said, I don't know, that's a great question, you're going to say, I'm actually going to go home tonight and actually find out that. And next lesson, I'm going to share with you what I found. I'm going to share with you the answer if I can find it. But if I can't find the answer, I'm just going to share with you what I found. And that's a really great way to respond because it does a few things. First, it puts the student at ease. They're going to get their question answered. Maybe not now, but they'll eventually get it answered. And the other thing it does is it models what it is like to solve a problem, right? We want to be demonstrating to kids, if you've got a question and you don't know the answer, it's okay to try and find out the answer. It seems like a no-brainer. If you're my age, 30 or so, or honestly, any age older than a child, you've probably experienced using Google before. I know that sounds like a dumb thing to say, but believe it or not, heaps of these kids don't know how to research. They don't know how to type things into Google and find the answer to stuff. You wouldn't believe how many times a student puts their hand up and says, "So what's the surface area of a cone formula?" And I go, "Have you Googled it?" And they go, "No." And I go, "Well, Google it." And they're like, "What do I type in?" I'm like, what do you mean? Just the exact question that you asked me. And that's something that we take for granted. I grew up with technology. In fact, I got taught how to use it in high school. So I take for granted that the kids, because they've grown up with technology, should know how to use it as well, but they haven't really had that explicit teaching. And so you've got to model how to find information as well, because these days they're so used to just having the information given to them at all times, from teachers, from parents, from TikTok, wherever they're consuming their information. It's always given to them, and they haven't really had to practice going out to find it. So by you saying, hey, I'm going to go home and I'm going to find out the answer to that question, you are modeling what it's like to have a question and then go find out the answer. Really powerful stuff for kids. Now, the second thing you can do, and probably my favorite, is that when the student asks the question, they say, how do you do this? You say, that's a great question. I actually don't know the answer to that. How about this? How about you, the student? How about you go home tonight? Your homework's different from everyone else, right? Your homework is going to be, you're going to find out the answer to this question, and you're going to come back and tell me, because I don't know, but I am really curious, and I would love it if you could teach me something. This is super powerful because it does a few things. One, again, you're modeling, or rather in this case, instructing the student how to go about this. They have a question, go home and find out the answer, right? You're telling them to explicitly do that. The student will do that. I promise you. If the student has a genuine question and you say, look, your homework's different from everyone else, you're a bit special because of that great question, go home and find out the answer. The kicker here, and the really important part of this though, otherwise it's just going to feel like homework, is you tell them you want them to come and teach you. Kids get a huge kick out of actually being able to teach their teacher something, especially if you're in a course like me where you're teaching quite high level stuff, or if you're in primary school where the kids are really dumb. Just kidding. But they're small and they've got tiny brains and they don't know a lot of things. So I guess you could consider that dumb. But if you're a teacher in primary school, for example, if a kid can teach you something, they get a real kick out of it. So giving them that opportunity and saying, you find out, you teach me, A, they're going to learn about the thing, I promise you. B, they get a kick out of teaching you. And C, they're going to ask more questions because they want to catch you out more so they can teach you more stuff. I promise you, this is amazing, especially for those kids working on that higher order thinking, which they are if they've asked you this kind of challenging question. So quickly to recap, first, you make sure that you acknowledge that you don't know, but you do it in a curious way. That's a good question. I don't know. Second part is acknowledge that it's a good question. And then either you tell them you're going to go find the answer, and make sure you do. Make sure you follow through and actually find out the answer. Or you tell the student to go find out the answer and report back and teach you a little something. Now, by the way, if you've reflected on these tips and you think, geez, that actually is a really good way to respond to these kind of situations, which it is, by the way, tried and tested, make sure you like this video. It tells YouTube that it tells the algorithm that all the videos I'm making about teaching are great and good value for teachers. So I appreciate you being here and hitting that like button. And the most important tip is to be as prepared as you possibly can. So especially when you're new and beginning, you're going to want to invest a lot of time into preparing for your lessons, right? As you move through your career, I'm in year 6 now, maybe year 7, and I don't really need to prepare as much because I've already done it in the past and I'm reaping the rewards now. But you need to be as prepared as possible. And a great way to be prepared is to just write the lesson out beforehand. In that time when I went 10, 11, 12 with that specialist mathematics class, I prepared every single lesson and written a written document every single lesson beforehand. So I already had the answers there. I already had the extension work there, and I didn't have to think on my feet as much. It really helped. And back then and now, the best way to do it, or at least in my opinion, the best program to do that in, because I do it digitally, is a program called Notability. So if you're interested in how to create lesson plans, beautiful lesson plans, by the way, it's got a bunch of features, highlighting, annotation, the works. Make sure you check out the video that's on the screen now. It's my favorite way to do lesson planning and it really helps when answering those unexpected questions. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you appreciated this content. If you did, make sure you hit the like button. I'll see you in the next video.